Hi, Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Welcome to Let's Talk Tropics on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon. Lots of sunshine and some chilly temperatures. I got that high there at 72, but we're really struggling into the mid 60s already. So starting to doubt my forecast there, but I think we'll probably hit close to 70 and then getting back into the 40s a little bit later on tonight as those winds start to die down. But this is Let's Talk Tropics, and we do have a couple of areas that we're still going to watch, and then a little later in this broadcast we're going to talk more about what's typical for the last several weeks of the hurricane season as things start to wind down. But we still have a little activity out there to watch, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. But as I said, we've got mostly sunny skies right now here in Acadiana, and those temperatures are hovering right around 64 degrees. The dew point down to 32 and that humidity at 30%. Now, you may have heard we do have a red flag warning in effect, and if you don't know what that is, that means the fire danger is quite high, mainly because of the air mass being so dry. And then on top of that, we haven't had any rain in about 3 weeks, and we're seeing these winds gusting about 25 to 30 miles per hour. So there is going to be some extreme fire danger out there. And if you remember, last summer during the drought, Louisiana experiencing one of its worst fire seasons in history. So be very careful out there. I know there are some local ordinances and some burn bans out there, but make sure you check with your local government officials before you do any burning. Know what you can and what you can't do on a day like today. But look at how gorgeous it is out there. Those skies are just incredibly blue. The air feels great. It's nice and dry out there and a decent breeze too. If you do have to do some traveling though, you might want to keep a good grip on the steering wheel, especially if you're going farther toward the west, maybe beyond, let's say, Crowley and Rain, and going over toward Lake Charles. And then along Highway 190 as well, across some of our inland parishes. Those wind speeds are going to be pretty brisk. So if you're driving a high profile vehicle like an 18-wheeler, you might be affected by some of those gustier winds. So do keep that in mind. But all of this is because of a deep trough that's digging across the northeastern section of the U.S. And that is allowing those cold breezes to come on down with a big ridge of high pressure that's going to be staying over the southeastern United States over the next several days. There's the front right about in here across, if I can get that thing to go there. It likes to draw like all kinds of different lines, but anyway, giving up on it. There's a look at the frontal boundary out here in the Gulf of Mexico. Just draw a little arrow instead, but it's going to continue to surge its way southward, and we're going to stay with that clear, dry air for later tonight, and that's going to help our temperatures to drop back into the 40s for our overnight lows. Of course, it does cause some other problems, not just the red flag warning, but boating is not going to be a real great day out there, and most of you that operate small craft out in the nearshore waters know that when you get a big strong cold front, things get really rough out there. And we have a small craft advisory that's in effect for the nearshore waters, and in the far offshore waters we have a gale warning out there. And in the nearshore waters, those winds are going to be out of the north about 20 to 25, seas up to 5 feet. Far offshore waters, so that gale warning, you can see those winds over 35 knots, and the seas could be building as high as 8 or 9 feet. So if small craft not likely to be out there, and for our friends who are working on some of the platforms out there, I'm sure you're getting some great shots of some much larger waves than what you normally would see out in the middle part of the Gulf of Mexico, especially during the summer when things are nice and smooth. But there's another look at the frontal boundary continuing to make headway across the central part of the Gulf of Mexico, and that is going to continue on through the afternoon and push well out into the waters. A lot of moisture out here in the southern part of the Bay of Campeche. We'll watch out for anything tropical to develop. Sometimes you get a low to develop on the tail end of a front. Right now that doesn't look very likely, and if anything develops out here, it's probably going to be a cold core low that will interact with that front and eventually kind of push back toward the north over the next several days. But that ridge of high pressure that's going to cover the southeastern part of the country is going to be very, very strong. So I don't expect a lot to lift northward toward the U.S. this time around. So on the Caribbean satellite, we're actually looking at two different areas here. 94L, which is just kind of coming onto the screen here from the east, and that's going to continue to drift toward the west. And then Cluster of thunderstorms that's out here over the western part of the Caribbean Sea has also been a bit of a flare-up over the last couple of days, and the National Hurricane Center is watching both of those. And a bigger picture of the Atlantic, you can see that 94L is now about halfway across the Atlantic. Looks a lot smaller on this shot compared to the other one, and you got some moisture that's out here off the African coast, but you'll also notice a little Saharan dust kind of coming off of the coast of Africa here too. So we don't expect a whole lot to go on in the far eastern Atlantic Ocean for the next couple of days, and a big ridge of high pressure here and actually over here as well would continue to shove 94L more in a westerly direction, more of what we would consider a traditional path across the Atlantic Ocean during hurricane season. So there's a look at the official 7-day outlook for the National Hurricane Center, still going with a 40% or a medium chance for some development of 94L, although the models are not as turned on today about it as it has been for the past couple of days. And then we're still going to watch that western edge of the Caribbean Sea. There's a very slight chance that we could see some development. If we do, it's probably going to be a minor low pressure area that will gradually start to push its way westward into portions of Central America. So let's go ahead and focus on 94L, and we're not really going to go into the hurricane models because the two hurricane models really kind of lose this over 2 or 3 days, having it washing out. So it isn't showing a whole lot with the hurricane models. So visible satellite showing still a bit of a visible circulation there at the surface. It is obscured though, and there's a lot more thunderstorm activity associated with it today. So maybe it'll have a little bit of a chance to come along over the next day or so. And then I don't think maybe day 3 will have a very good chance, but by day 4 or 5, as it moves closer to the northern Caribbean islands, it might have a better chance. And even some of the hurricane models have really dropped off on this. You know, yesterday we had several of the models carrying it all the way to the west toward Cuba and Jamaica. And now we've got a number of models that actually kind of shut this thing off once it moves into the Caribbean Sea here south of Puerto Rico. You got other models that still take it off toward the west into the western part of the Caribbean, but you can see there's a couple of these models here that are just really starting to drop off now as you get out to about 48 and about 72 hours. Intensity models have backed off as well. There are a few that are still possibly going with maybe a tropical depression trying to form here in days 3, 4, or 5, and you still got a couple of models here that go up to hurricane mode, and some here in the long range that go up to a weak hurricane as it moves off toward the west. So we'll just continue to watch those models, but the trend has been considerably lower over the last 24 hours. So hopefully we won't have anything to worry about over the northern parts of the Caribbean islands. But of course, November is one of those times it's kind of a little weird where you get some of these tropical systems to develop, and then they can be fairly intense with rainmakers. Occasionally they get fairly strong when it comes to hurricanes, but really it's more of a rainmaker because you get cut off from some of the main flow, and a lot of this stuff moves very, very slow. So there's a little bit of a closer look at some of that flare up of convection here over the western part of the Caribbean Sea. Again, it's not showing any signs of any organization, but as it slowly kind of drifts off toward the west-northwest, I think Nicaragua, Honduras, the Yucatan Peninsula, and Belize will probably be seeing some rainy days, especially as we head into the weekend. So let's go out 10 days and just look at our global models real quick and show you that the GFS still trying to have kind of a weak low pressure area developing here in the next 2 to 3 days, and then kind of drifting off toward the west. Going to let it reset here, and there it is, the beginning of it. You can see a little trough of low pressure kind of working west into Belize and then moving across Central America. And then also if you look out to the east, again, I'll let this reset one more time, and here's the beginning of it. You don't see a whole lot out here with 94L. You might get a little ripple of low pressure there over Haiti or the Dominican Republic, but either that ridge of high pressure in a frontal boundary kind of kicks it back out to this way, or there might be a very weak remnant low kind of drifting off toward the west, but very inconclusive, especially since the GFS actually was kind of developing a tropical system in that area earlier on. It also had a pretty good handle on developing 94L. And today's run from this morning really doesn't show either one. So that's good news for the Caribbean, and maybe we won't get a new name storm. Euro model has a bit of a low out here as well, and again, very slowly drifting its way off toward the west into Central America, and then eventually into Mexico as we get into the early part of next week. And then as we look a little bit farther to the east, when this thing starts to reset once again, you got a little moisture there from 94L, and it kind of works its way off toward the west, but you really just don't see anything take shape here over the northern Caribbean islands. Maybe a little extra moisture right here before something picks it up and shoots it back out toward the northeast. So that's the only thing that I can see for 94L when it comes to the Euro model. So like the GFS, the Euro doesn't seem to be too excited about either one of these little disturbances that are out there. The Canadian model has been a little bit more robust on trying to develop something early on here and then moving it off toward the west. And it also has a little bit better handle on keeping a closed center of low pressure for 94L. So it's about right there now, and then kind of continuing right about there. And then as we get into Monday, it's right about there. And then about Wednesday, Thursday of next week, it's right about there. So it does continue to keep a low pressure area, perhaps a tropical depression at best, drifting off toward the west. So with looking at what we're talking about on this particular model, that area right there would have just a better chance for some decent rains and maybe some rougher seas to go along with it. And finally, on the Icon model, which unfortunately doesn't go quite as far out, but it goes out 7 days, and you can see for the first few days, you got a pretty good low pressure area that develops over the western part of the Caribbean. So we'll go ahead and let it start over here once again as we get into Thursday of next week. And as we start, you get that low right about there, and then it very slowly starts to work here, and then by Sunday it's right about there, and then by early next week it's moved inland over parts of Mexico. On the other side, you're still watching what might be 94L, possibly working westward and then turning north. So there it is there on Thursday. This is about Saturday. And then about Sunday, it kind of stalls out here. And then by Monday, Tuesday of next week, you see it start to pull off toward the northeast as it gets more caught up in a trough. And by Thursday of next week, it's pushing away from the Caribbean islands. So right now, it doesn't look like we're going to be too affected by this. But you do remember over the last few weeks, models have indicated almost nothing on a Friday, and then by the time we came back on Monday, in the case of Milton, we had a Category 5 hurricane. I'm not expecting anything like that to happen in this particular case, but it's always best to watch it, and it's always interesting during hurricane season to try to pick and choose what's going to develop, what isn't going to develop, and just kind of follow along with the models. And I know most of you who have watched the show over the past couple of months have known well in advance when things are going to be developing. And it's always good to have a better idea of what's happening out there so you can be better prepared. As far as preparing for anything locally, I don't think we're going to have to worry about that because basically all four models have that giant ridge of high pressure here over the southeast, and that would block anything from coming into the eastern or the western Atlantic as well as the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico. And let's just say for some reason something decided to try to come in our direction. Well, it's not going to have a whole lot of luck because look at all the wind shear here over the Gulf of Mexico and even the western part of the Atlantic. So even if anything tried to turn in this direction, it would just get torn apart by the wind shear. And the water temperatures are starting to drop off a little bit, not really where we're going to be still seeing the possibility of some development over parts of the Caribbean as we get into October, at the end of October and November. But notice here right along the coast, you're starting to see more of those greens. Anything that's not yellow or brighter is under 26.5 degrees Celsius, which is under 80 degrees. So it's a lot harder for a tropical system to survive in an environment where the water temperatures are considerably cooler. So over time, with these cool air masses that start to drop down and get into the Gulf of Mexico, gradually it's going to start to cool those waters down as well. I did want to show you, though, the Global Tropics Hazard Outlook, which was issued yesterday. So remember when we look at the Tropical Weather Outlook, which is up here, this is giving us the next 7 days. So when we look at the Global Tropics Hazard Outlook, this is going into week 2 and week 3. So you still see there's a possibility of seeing some development perhaps over from the Bahamas or perhaps Cuba. That might be what is 94L, so you're talking about getting into the middle part of next week, but that actually might be outside of that window. But this only determines where you would see some development, not where it would track and move through. So if something develops here and moves into that area, that doesn't count. It would be development only in this particular area. Then we're going into week 3, which is actually starting to get us into that final month of hurricane season, getting into November, but it is still seeing maybe a little higher than normal chance for some tropical cyclone development or formation there over the central and western part of the Caribbean Sea. But that would actually fall in line with what's fairly normal for this time of the year. These are the tracks of named storms, not necessarily where they develop, but where they have tracked. And it's a lot less than what you see in September and August, but October you still see some development over the western Caribbean, and a lot of times they turn northeastward, crossing Florida or the Bahamas or Cuba, and then heading out into the Atlantic Ocean. And then as we get into November, you see that the tracks of storms are even less. Things really start to shut down, but that western part of the Caribbean, far western Atlantic around the Bahamas, and some of them do track beyond Bermuda out in the central part of the Atlantic. But once we get into November, everything really shrinks down to that one small area. And then once we end November, sometimes we have an outside of the season storm in December. We sometimes see preseason storms. It happens every once in a while. But by the time you get to the end of November, things really start to quiet down. And really for us here along the northern Gulf Coast, once we get into November, we can usually let our guard down. We've had some tropical storms come close to the coast as we get into the latter part of October. But in November, I'm pretty sure we've never seen a hurricane strike the Louisiana coastline. So we are in the home stretch, and after a very busy season, even though the numbers haven't come up as high as what some of the early season forecasts were showing, we have had 5 landfalling hurricanes along the Gulf Coast. So for us here locally, it does seem like it's been a relatively busy season. Well, that's what I've got for you on this Wednesday. I hope you get out and enjoy. I got all of my windows open in my house today and just letting that cool air blast right through. If you enjoy Let's Talk Tropics, please like this video and subscribe to my channel, and also turn on those notifications. I enjoy these midday visits each and every day. And in between broadcasts, whether it be Acadiana Weather Today or Let's Talk Tropics, you can also visit my social media pages, both on Facebook and X. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you on Thursday. Enjoy.